Eval Health is an app platform for clinicians and researchers to create, share, and deploy clinical apps. To learn more, meet us at eval.health and click Learn.
Hi, this is Jennifer Glenn, Chief Medical Officer with Eval Health, and I'm going to introduce you to our formula editor in Eval. And we're going to walk through how to create a very basic calculator, points calculator app. And part of this is an introduction to spreadsheet formulas as sort of a language to program how to do basic calculations and decisioning within the apps. And if you're familiar with Excel spreadsheet-like formulas, then this will come to you very naturally. However, if you're not, that's okay too. And we have a couple tip sheets that will help you identify any formula that might help you in creating your app, and I'll include that in the show notes. If you also want to skip around, I'll include timestamps as well. I also wanted to mention that I have another video or a few videos that cover how to create an account as well as how to create an app shell and how to just navigate through some basic features. So check those videos out if you haven't already. Otherwise, we're going to jump right in and just start creating the app. We're going to recreate the Centor Score for strep pharyngitis. And I want to show you the finished product up front so you have some context on what we're doing today. And essentially, the app helps providers identify patients who are high risk for strep so they know who to test and who not to test. And it's based on several risk factors. And so these will be the questions that we are going to ask. And what will happen is we'll get a calculation about how many points were scored based on the choices that were answered, as well as a likelihood that they have strep. So there are some calculations that are behind this app. So let's get started and work from a shell that I just created. And we're going to start building our questions. So I'm going to add, our first question is really just a simple title. This is a style that you can decide how you want to do this. Sometimes I'll write out a full question like what age group is the patient, or you could just use the word age. It's all about how you want to construct and communicate in the app. So for this particular one, I'm just going to put age, and it is going to be a one choice selection, and I like to align vertically, and let's add our first choice. The title is going to be an age group, 3 to 14 years. And now in this particular case, we do want to put a formula value. So this is a points calculator. So the app is going to calculate based on the points that we assign a choice. It's going to add all of those choices up and give a point score to the user. And in this particular use case, point. And I'll click Create Choice. And I'm going to add my next choice. I wanted to point out on this third choice, 45 years or older, I do have a negative formula value. So you can put negative numbers as well as decimal points in as well. So I have my first question, which is age, my three choice groups. We can take a look on the left just to make sure everything is correct. And you can see that I've got my choices displayed as well as the point value associated with it. These points will not display to the user in the player mode. Let's add another question. So for the sake of time, I've gone ahead and finished the rest of the questions, and you can again inspect these questions, ensure that you have the point set up appropriately. I also wanted to mention that for this particular points calculator, I do have it set up as a section by section presentation. And that's important to note because that means I have one section, and in this case it's just a default section. You could change that title, you could add multiple sections, but all my questions are under one section right now, and it's set up where all those questions are going to display at once, which means I do not have to set up a visibility rule for each question. If I had chosen one at a time, then I would have to include a visibility rule for every question that I write. So in this case, if you're unsure, if you open any one of the questions and you look at the visibility when, you'll see that it's always visible. So we're ready to dive into setting up our results. But I want to flip over and show you a finished result so you know where we're going with this. There's a couple important features when you're working with formulas. So when you're in an actual result, and you can see here highlighted in blue, it's this first one, 1 to 2% likelihood of strep. There's a couple sections I want to point out. First, there's a formula section right under the description. And here is where you're going to perform computations. And that would be summing up points or some other advanced computation that you're going to be displaying to the user. And for this particular use case, I like to add up the points and display the amount of points to the user. You may choose not to do that and just simply show the title 1 to 2% without the number of points. But it's often helpful, in my opinion, as a user doing any sort of calculation to say, so where do I fall on that point scale? Because it might change my mind regarding what I do for that patient or that person that you're consulting with. So in this use case, I am going to show you how to do a computation that'll display along with the result. And then when we get to the bottom, we have this visibility when. And what this does is it allows us to dictate when should that result display. What are the criteria? And in this situation, we're going to be relying again on a formula or a spreadsheet based formula to determine when that result will display. So we have two areas that we have to build as it relates to formulas, and we'll also want to test out in our scenario tests, and I'll show you what that looks like later. So we're going to flip back and start building this so you see what this looks like from scratch. So I've added my title, and our format is going to be formula this time. Now you can still add a description, and I am going to do that. Next, you can see this formula expression, and we're going to click on that. And I'm going to start with the keyword section. And what this does is it allows me to identify the specific data that I want to target. So the first thing I'm going to click on is source. And again, this is a source library, so I'm going to be able to see all of these sections And you can see the default section here is the only section we have for this one, but if there was multiple, you would see multiple sections, as well as all the questions and choices and any results that I've created. The one that I'm working on right now is grayed out. We don't self-reference the result, but you would see other results as I progress through building the app. In this particular situation, I'm going to want to sum up all the points to all the questions. And an easy way to do that is just to select the default section. So all of those choices that are selected in that section will be added, or will be used for that matter. In this situation, we're going to use a formula to add them all up. So now that I have my keyword, or I have selected all of the data points that I want to use, I do want to name it. So I'm going to call it points. And then we're going to go up to our formula expression. And I'm going to use a spreadsheet command that will sum up all of the questions. Now we named the questions, we identified points, so I'm going to sum the points. And if you are unsure of formulas or what to use, in the description I'll put some links into some formula cheat sheets that you can look at and use, and also some tips on how to format these expressions. And what's really nice about the eval platform is that if I accidentally formatted this, I will get an error result, which tells me that I've incorrectly formatted the command. And there are some, and as these expressions get long and as you get more advanced in your skill, there are some tricks to the trade on how you stay organized. And we'll have some more videos covering some more advanced calculations, and we'll give you some more tips. So I am done with this formula, and we'll click the back button. And we'll also want to include a unit of measure. This particular formula is going to display points, but as a matter of style, again, I like to tell the user what that point scale is, so I included out of 5 points. The visibility rule is going to dictate when the specific result appears. So let's click New Rule. We're going to create a formula this time that's going to help dictate when this result is going to show. And this is, of course, going to be based on the sum of the points will dictate when this particular result is going to appear. So similar to what we did before, and certainly this editor looks very much the same as what the formula editor was above, but slightly different use, and I'll explain here in a moment. But let's start with our keyword. And again, we want to identify the data set that we want to use. And since the purpose is to sum the points and identify what point spread will trigger this particular result. So we're going to want the calculation of the total points. And so we're going to want to identify the data, which is going to be the default section, all those questions added up. And we're going to call this points, just like we did before. And above in this formula expression box, there's several ways we can approach this, because there are 2 steps. First, we do need, in this particular result, all the points to be summed, and then we need to show that based on that number what to do. Should we show or not show this particular result? And certainly you could enter those commands all right here. But the idea behind this formula editor is to simplify the process, and for several reasons. One is oftentimes apps can get complicated in their formulas, and it's easy to make a mistake, especially when it comes to formatting. And then with transparency, being able to track all the different expressions and ensuring that they're accurate and it's the result that you're hoping to achieve. So we have this other section below called named expressions. And what this allows us to do is to break up a large set of commands. And in this case, again, there's going to be two. One, sum the points, and then whether or not to trigger this result based on the result of those. And so for this new expression, what we're going to do is identify the formula that will sum the points, and we're going to call this the score. So you can name it whatever you want, but for me, this makes sense to me. What's also interesting is you could add a comment. So again, for the sake of peer review and transparency, this is an opportunity to describe anyone who's kind of looking under the hood what the purpose is of this particular expression or formula that you're using. So now that we have the expression for score, I can go to the top and I can write a more simple formula that essentially states if the score, which is what we identified below as the sum of the points, is less than or greater than 0. If that's true, then show this result. If it's false, then don't show this result. So in essence, this visibility rule is about a true-false statement, whereas the formula above it was providing computation or a result. So let's click apply. You can see the visibility rule is now present, and I'm going to click save. We've got to save the work we've done before we can set up a test scenario. So I want to test that I set this up correctly, and this is a great way to do that. And as you can see, based on all the questions that we've set up already, they already auto-populate for us, which makes it so much easier. So let's start by adding a title, and I'm going to put score of 0 because that's what I'm going to test in this particular case. So I'm going to have to answer these questions knowing what a score of 0 would be. So this should equal to 0, and I have to actually put that in there because this is my manual calculation. I got on a calculator, I did long form to ensure that this is the result that I expect, and indeed the actual result the system got was also 0. So my test has passed, and it also triggered 1 to 2.5% likelihood, which is the result I wanted triggered. So two things are tested in this test scenario, not only the actual value or result of 0, but also that it correctly triggered this particular result. So once I'm satisfied with that, I will click apply. Go back, you'll see that test scenario is registered with the green check mark. And for thoroughness, I would recommend that you test everything within that parameter within reason. Another option would be to test the lowest value and the highest value of that range and maybe one middle one, which then deduces that the values in between should also work as well. So depending on your time and the scope of the app, set up those test scenarios appropriately. Additionally, you'll also always want to manual test and do peer review as another measure that what you're setting up is accurate and working as expected. In the spirit of time, I've gone ahead and set up the other results, but I did want to just walk through them real briefly just to cement in some of the concepts. So I have 4 additional results, and they're all patterned the same way with one small difference. So on this second result, 5 to 10%, the formula is set up the exact same. So it's sum of the points, same keywords, same expression, no different for each of these. But when you get down to the visibility when rule, that's when it shifts, because there are different criteria that I want the 5 to 10% likelihood to appear. So let's take a look at that. The formula set up here is sum of the points equaling 1. So if the points equal 1, then that result should appear. And that is what is reflected here. But the criteria is different. Another thing I want to point out is there are often many ways to do things. And in this particular use case, as you can see, I did not use the named expressions. I actually combined the two commands here. So you have some leverage based on the complexity of what you're working with is how you tackle it. But there, in this use case, two different ways that you could tackle this. So now that we have our results and our instructions set up, let's take a look at this in the player. So we have our one section with all of the questions appearing at the same time. And let's go ahead and answer the questions. And in this case, you see the result here that there's a 5 to 10% likelihood of strep. Additionally, we get the total points, which in this case is 1 out of 5 points, and we get the instructions of what I should do about it. And that would be a recommendation for no further testing or antibiotics. If you want to learn more, click on Explore and Learn, and we have a guide that walks you through how to work with our formula editor in more detail. Thank you.